Okay, good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for attending our International Institute Fellowships grantee panel this afternoon. My name is Beth Rich-Corp. I am a fellowships advisor here at the International Institute, and today we have 4 panelists joining us from various different backgrounds, various different field and research interests, all who were recipients of funding from the International Institute or one of its many centers. Our first presenter today, Julie Boozer, is a nursing still pre-candidate PhD, who received the African Studies Center Research and Internship Support in Africa and the II Individual Fellowship to do research in Zambia. Just a little bit about the International Institute Individual Fellowship. These fellowships are designed to support University of Michigan students, regardless of citizenship, who are enrolled in a degree program and wish to participate in internships or conduct research abroad. There is no preference for particular fields of study, and the International Institute aims to fund a diverse array of students and projects. Just a little bit about the African Studies Center Research and Internship Support in Africa. These are fellowships that provide support for undergraduate and graduate students in preliminary or more advanced stages of their research. It helps support, in addition, internships in governmental agencies, businesses, or non-governmental institutions in the region. So we'd like to welcome Julie up to talk a little bit to us today about her application process and what amazing research she did while she was abroad. So Julie.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you today. As mentioned, I received a fellowship last summer. Can you hear me? Okay. To study the impact of maternity waiting homes in rural Zambia on newborns. I'd like to begin by presenting an overview of my discussion and fellowship, how I organized the project, how I compiled the application, and how the fellowship fits in with my degree process. The purpose of my fellowship was to examine the impact of maternity waiting homes on newborn outcomes and inform the development of targeted interventions to decrease newborn mortality in 2 rural districts of Zambia. Maternity waiting homes are facilities where women can come prior to delivery to ensure access to skilled birth attendants at their birth. Here I've included a map of Africa, and Zambia is highlighted in red. It's in South Central Africa, and you can see an example of a maternity waiting home there as well. My research was guided by questions: what factors impact the access, utilization, and perception of maternity waiting homes to improve newborn mortality and morbidity in low-resource settings for women living more than 10 kilometers away from a health facility? These maternity waiting homes are situated next to health facilities. Another question of mine was, how can nurses implement a newborn health educational curriculum aimed at increasing utilization of these maternity waiting homes among women living more than 10 kilometers away? So the idea is to hopefully address the geographical gap that exists for women living in rural areas and their access to health care. My research hypothesis was that increased access to facility delivery through the use of these maternity waiting homes would improve newborn mortality and morbidity for those neonates with mothers living more than 10 kilometers away from the health facility. I organized my fellowship by having discussions with my academic advisor and mentor. I did some reflecting on my own personal goals and what I wanted to achieve with the fellowship. And I thought about those goals in a broad reflection of what my career goals are. And in preparation for the fellowship and my application, I did some background reading about Zambia, about healthcare, culture, environment, language, all of these things that are important to know before deciding to embark on an investigation in a country that is not my own. And I always kept in mind the goodness of fit of my proposed research to the Zambian setting and again within my larger career trajectory. In compiling the application, I considered the background, study context and purpose, the theoretical foundation of my work. In the design, I wanted to make sure to have clear, specific aims and to include as much detail as I could about the methods, such as setting, sampling, and data collection, my analysis plan, and my projected outcomes. This all required a good deal of thought before I made my application for the fellowship. I needed to consider ethical implications of my work as an outsider in another country. And I wanted to consider research team qualifications, advancement of my own student scholarship, as well as preparing a budget, which is not something I had thought of really before I made the application. My fellowship certainly fit into my degree progression, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity that I had. It solidified my eventual goal to work as a nurse scientist. I hadn't done nursing research before last summer in a developing country. So it was an important experience for me to have. I thought I would like it, but I didn't know. And it turns out I do enjoy working in a low resource setting, conducting nursing research. And so that helps solidify my goal, my eventual goal, to improve global child health. And I intend to take full advantage of my fellowship to generate new knowledge in the future and to develop relationships to explore innovative ways of improving child health and the lives of newborns throughout the world. My experience last summer in Zambia provides a good, solid foundation for my future research in Zambia. I intend to go back this summer and build on the research that I conducted during my fellowship and to rekindle relationships that I started building and grow them and gather more community-level data that will eventually strengthen my scholarly portfolio. I'm happy to take any questions, or perhaps we are moving on to a discussion of the other panelists. Thank you.
I want to thank Julie for the great presentation. We will take questions at the end. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, because we are recording today, raise your hand and I will be happy to bring a microphone to you so we can capture your great questions for our panelists today. I want to introduce next Andrew Cabaniss, who is an IPCAA PhD pre-candidate, who held the II Individual Fellowship Research in Greece. Andrew.
Great, thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about my field research in Greece this past summer, which was funded by the International Institute as well as the Interdisciplinary Program in Classical Art and Archaeology, which is the program that I'm getting my PhD in, which is basically a classical field archaeology program. And so what my research does is tries to integrate excavation data, the kind of way that we learn about the world in archaeology, with other types of information, and particularly trying to do things like quantitative and computational analysis. So here you can see a picture of the site of Azoria, which is a hilltop located in eastern Crete, which is the largest island in the Aegean. And it is an archaic city, which means it was occupied between about 650 and 500 BC, and is kind of a nice example for trying to understand processes of urbanism, trying to understand why cities get to be the way they are. These projects take a lot of people, they take a lot of time. The Azoria project has been working since 2002 and has approximately 100 people working on it at any given summer. So when I say that this was part of my project, what I mean is that I was part of a larger team. And I think that's something that should be kind of emphasized about these sorts of fellowships, is that you can use them to engage in fieldwork that really expands beyond what a single person can accomplish. So basically, this past summer, I spent about 7 weeks doing fieldwork over the course of a 7-week excavation season. So while other people were out digging, other people were cataloging pottery, cataloging objects, I spent a fair amount of my time wandering around the site with a GPS, basically recording the locations of objects, of the sorts of scientific samples that we take, of walls and architecture, and slowly integrating them into a large database, which enables me to do the sorts of research that I want to do on how do households develop, how do cities develop. That's very difficult to do if you have to do all of this by paper and hand. I then spent about 2 weeks of study and analysis using the excellent research facilities that are available in Crete at the Institute for the Study of Aegean Prehistory Study Center for East Crete, or INSTAP SCEC, as I think there aren't enough abbreviations yet in the world. And there, based on their library, their study collections, and the archives of the project, I was able to make some progress on some of my research, trying to understand how these households worked. This was not my first year attending this project or working at this project. This was my fourth, in fact. However, applying for the individual fellowship did require a little bit of kind of different work, as you do need to demonstrate a lot of things that otherwise might not go into paper, onto paper. So one of the first things I did was actually email the director of the study center and say that, hey, I'm applying for this fellowship. I'm planning on doing some of my own research. I would like to know kind of what resources I'm allowed to use, just make sure that we already have all this figured out ahead of time so that nothing awkward happened when I got there. And that was basically how I ended up writing my description of in-country resources, which was my demonstration to the International Institute that really, yes, all of these things exist. These people are real, these places are real. I can accomplish what I need to there. And that also involved talking with the director of the project, who, of course, had to approve me going back and continuing to work there. I then started doing some basic research on just trying to make sure that I got all of my expenses right for my budget. Most of these things make a lot of sense. I think we're all very comfortable using Google at this point and other such search engines to figure out flight costs. One thing that I think is hard for us to think about is housing and food. And I strongly recommend that anybody who's interested in applying for this look at the Department of State foreign per diem rates, as they are a really good guide to figure out what the most is that you should be spending, because there's no way you should be spending as much as a State Department employee on your summer research project. And if you are, something's gone wrong. So I happen to know that for Greece, the per diem rate is about $70. I spent about $20 a day on food. I spent much less than that on housing. So you can kind of figure out that, yes, you're on the right track, and that this is actually a doable project. And also, a reminder to everybody who's filling this out, as I know that the deadline is coming up soon, remember to add in mandatory travel insurance, as you really do want that. We had somebody break their knee and have to be medevaced this summer, so we are, just in case you thought that that was a frivolous thing, no, it's not. Make sure you get it. In addition to the logistics, there's also kind of the research side of things, how this fits into the rest of my work. So in terms of my kind of statement of purpose, I spent about a third of it talking about how this fits with my larger research goals. So I am a PhD pre-candidate. I have about another year of coursework, and then I have 3 to 4 years of writing, depending on how long that little dissertation project takes. All of that kind of integrates a lot of this information. I'm interested in studying cities and households and how these things work together. And this kind of first 2 paragraphs basically just set out how all of this fits and what the goals are of trying to do field research like this. Because this is an existing project and you do need to differentiate one's role, I then spent about a third of my application talking about why I particularly am interested in this project, and also what my role is in the project, and exactly how I would be accomplishing that role in terms of the daily work I would be doing, what this fellowship was actually funding me to do, and my schedule in terms of both my own research and kind of basic travel and things like that. In terms of that schedule, I ended up submitting the application, I think on the last day it was due this last year, on February 15th. I heard back about 2 months later and was approved for about $4,000. I asked for about $5,000, so that worked pretty nicely and was able to get some other money to kind of put everything together. My project then started May 28th. I left Greece on July 30th. I got stuck in a few airports on the way, which is why I'm not saying when I got home. And that basically was what I submitted. That was kind of all according to schedule. In terms of what this contributed to myself, when I came back in August, I submitted my report to the International Institute as well as some photos for the photo contest. I then gave a talk to my department on fieldwork as part of a kind of panel on what we had all been doing that summer to the general public, which is something we do regularly. I then presented a poster at the International Institute poster session, which is another great opportunity that happens as a result of this fellowship. And then, the data that I collected will be part of some publications as well as my dissertation. Some of the research I was able to do in the library with these Greek volumes that don't really exist in the United States were incredibly valuable and will, again, kind of continue to help me throughout the years. And of course, the connections that you make from being at a study center like that really are useful. And there's certainly going to be projects in the future that emerge from this summer's work. So I'd like to thank the IIIF, IPCAA, the Azria Project, and INSTAP for all of the support this last summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a great presentation. Next up, we have Tarlise Townsend, who is a Master's in Public Policy student who received the Rackham International Research Award to conduct research and an internship in Vietnam. Just a little bit about the Rackham International Research Award. This is to support Rackham doctoral candidates and master students conducting degree-related research outside the United States and Puerto Rico. Applicants may be of any citizenship, but must be in good academic standing in a Rackham degree program. The proposed research must be directly related to a dissertation or thesis. And we are now going to hear from Tarlise about her experience.
Okay, great. So I interned at the United Nations Population Fund this past summer in their country office in Hanoi, Vietnam. I was working with the population and development team within UNFPA. And I was studying locations and populations that are so-called vulnerability hotspots to climate change. And I was looking at this through a public health and policy lens. So why was I there? The simple answer is that this satisfied my internship requirement for the Master in Public Policy at the Ford School. But of course, that is not really why I wanted to be in Vietnam, nor is it really does it really encompass what I actually gained from the process? And so I'll talk more about that in a future slide. So thinking about developing the project, I'll share a few principles that worked for me or that I used, whether or not they worked for me, that might benefit others. So of course, anytime you're going abroad, it's really critical to be flexible because there are always many surprises. And so one of the first surprises for me was that when I applied to UNFPA, I actually applied to the sexual and reproductive health team. And they got my CV and my cover letter and they said, oh, we actually don't need an intern for this summer, but we're going to pass your information on to the population and development team. And they followed up with me just a few days later and said, oh, we see on your CV that you do climate change work or you've done climate change work in the past, and we really need somebody who does climate change work. So can you do that for us this summer? Which was a bit unexpected, but I do climate change work and I like working on climate change. But what was critical for me was that I develop an internship that related to my master's and also was going to be relevant to my PhD, which I started this past fall. So I was about to start it over the summer. And so my contact and I at UNFPA ended up going back and forth a bit on, okay, how can I satisfy your needs from an intern at the same time that I'm ensuring that I'm growing and applying the skills that I've gained in my master's program so far. So it was this sort of combination of being really flexible, but also very intentional in how I developed the project. Feasibility, of course, is always a big challenge when you're thinking about a project overseas. There are a few strategies that I've used that I think are pretty helpful. So one is that it's critical to develop a timeline, of course, up front, but also to realize that there are lots of reasons that timeline may not pan out as expected. And so one thing I do is to try to develop projects that will be valuable even if I only complete 75% of what I originally intended to complete because there was some kind of logistical challenge or bureaucratic challenge or whatever could arise. Also, I think creating backup projects that are easy wins can be really valuable. So I had a big project that I was working on throughout the semester or throughout the summer, but I also had these individual projects that took 2 to 3 weeks. They were basically policy briefs that UNFPA used in engagement with policymakers in Vietnam. And I knew that they were going to get done, and I knew that they were going to be used. So they were sort of easy wins for me. They were clear takeaways. And I think having something like that can be really valuable. Some very general principles, of course, always prepare for surprises and build extra time into your timeline. So it's always going to take longer than you think. And constantly reevaluate on the ground. So this is a picture of one of my close colleagues, Mai, and she was always there to sort of reevaluate with me throughout the summer, like, okay, we encountered these surprises. What does this mean for our timeline now going forward? Lastly, not only are there always challenges that arise unexpectedly, there are always opportunities also that arise. And so ensuring that you're open to those can really help create a project that is even more successful maybe than you anticipated. And in my case, that emerged from actually what was rather tragic, and that is that there was a drought in the Mekong Delta this year in central and southern Vietnam that was much more extreme than expected, which meant that millions of people were suffering from drought in Vietnam while I was there, and of course drought is linked to climate change. So we really at the last minute pulled together a small team to go do 3 days of field work in the Mekong Delta where we interviewed folks all the way from the provincial government all the way down to individual residents, which ended up contributing a ton to my final project. Okay, having resources and having a network on the ground is really valuable, both as you compile your application and, of course, once you're there. I had actually been in Vietnam previously for a year, so I had some existing connections there. And so what I ended up doing was reaching out to those people before I submitted my applications for funding, letting them know that I was going to be in town and asking whom else they would suggest I talk to, who else they could connect me to once I was on the ground, and so on. And where relevant, I included those things in my application. Of course, my team at UNFPA was also a launch pad. But one challenge that you might encounter if you're working in an office setting or a team setting is that people are really busy, and they may not have as much time as you would like to contribute or support you on the project. And so what I ended up doing was, because my point of contact, my sort of assigned boss, was really overwhelmed with projects while I was there, I found somebody else on our team who was really excited about climate change, and she ended up being the person who introduced me to folks who I needed to connect with. She was a great person to brainstorm with, and she even set up a presentation at the end of my time there that was for the whole United Nations in Vietnam, which was really incredible. The really important thing, particularly in Southeast Asia, but also I imagine in a lot of other parts of the world, is to really show up for quote-unquote chill time, because so many of my resources were developed through those informal interactions. People are just it's so much more easy for them to open up when you're sort of outside of the professional setting. So this is our daily lunch that we would have of pho in the UN offices. Okay, building the application. This may not be necessary for folks like Andrew who've been working on the research for years, but for somebody like me, the project that we developed, that I developed in tandem with the UNFPA office, was this sort of fusion of their needs and my interests. And so that meant a different angle of research than I'd taken before. So it was really critical that I do some background research to make sure that I could convey in the application why this matters in a big picture sense. So I needed to do some of that broader lit review. Of course, it's critical to get feedback from others. So in my case, that was largely the Graduate Career Services Office at the Ford School. I asked them about whether my coherence or whether my project made any sense. Are there things in the application that I should highlight more or less? One thing that came out of those meetings was the importance of my previous experience in Vietnam and really communicating that I had the cultural experience and sensitivity to function in a Vietnamese workplace. And so this picture is from the last time I was in Vietnam in 2013 at a party with my office mates. And then, of course, we also talked about aligning different funding opportunities. In addition to the International Institute Fellowship, which I'm very grateful for, I also received funding from the Ford School and from the Center of Education on Women. So I'm happy to talk about those as well. And then the last thing maybe second to last thing in terms of building the application is, of course, think critically about the logistics. Go beyond just thinking about your project, because that's just half of your life. You also have to think about, as Andrew mentioned, where are you going to be living? Also, are you planning on pursuing language training? If so, with whom? How much does that cost? How are you going to fit that into your life? And one thing that I didn't think about as much as I should have, that I think is a word to the wise, is to really consider health and safety issues as well. So one big challenge that I encounter while I'm in Hanoi is the air pollution. And I would commute via these motorbikes to and from work every day. And that meant that I was getting a lot of pollution exposure. So what I ended up doing was buying some really high quality masks that ended up being pretty expensive. And so retroactively, I had to ask for funding for those, which I received. But I think if I had been thinking about those things up front, I could have included those in my budget to begin with. Okay, and then establishing the link with my degrees. So as I mentioned, I focused less on the requirement aspect because that, at the end of the day, is really not that important component of why I went to Vietnam. So I really emphasized 3 themes. The first was this was an opportunity to apply the skills I'd learned in my MPP. So that included policy analysis, policy writing, statistics, economics, and so on. And then also, because I was about to start this PhD, I really emphasized how critical this would be for my thinking about dissertation projects. And in fact, I'm now building directly off of the research that I did this summer. I also really wanted to go back to Vietnam because I'd spent time there before and I'd learned the language and gotten to know the culture, and I really wanted to work towards a specialization in Southeast Asia and specifically Vietnam. I also emphasized that what the United Nations internship offered was a new angle into the country. So last time I had worked at government in the Vietnamese government, and that's a whole different picture than what you see through the United Nations lens. So that's that. This is a photo from the Áo Dài Day in Vietnam. Our office decided that we should celebrate the traditional dress, and so we all wore traditional Vietnamese clothing and took photos for about 2 hours in the hot, hot Hanoi heat. Feel free to follow up with me. My email's here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tarly, and for the offer to follow up with you with additional questions as well. So we have heard so far from 2 PhD students. We've heard from a master's student, and now we're going to hear from an undergraduate student, Aliya Khan, in Anthropology and Computer Science, who received the II Samo Alajbegovic Fellowship to conduct research in Italy. Just a few words about the Samo Alajbegovic Fellowship. This fellowship offers summer grants to help fund research and internship opportunities in the fields of marine biology, ecology, anthropology, archaeology, and humanities, specifically for undergraduate students in the College of LS&A in the regions of the Northern Mediterranean, namely Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Aliya, we will welcome you up and to talk about your time in Italy.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I am a sophomore right now, so I actually applied to this fellowship during my freshman year, and I was just amazed that it worked out, honestly, because coming into college, I had no idea that I would have this kind of experience so soon, and I'm really grateful for it because I think it's shaped a lot about what I've decided to do with academics. originally I was like, oh, I'm gonna work at a software company. That's definitely what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna like code all the time. And I think that this project has really influenced me to look into graduate programs and like considering doing a PhD eventually, because I really enjoyed it and I really liked learning about the research project. So I got involved with Gabi through the Europe program, and I was a research assistant for all of last year. And basically what I did is I worked with their, like, what they're trying to do is digitalize archaeology in a way where you have like 3D models of the site, and you use those models to see the artifacts in their original context. So I was working with producing those models and organizing their databases, and then to actually go to the site over the summer was amazing because I got to see all the things that I had been working on for the whole year. So this is just the introductory slide. And then this is just a little bit about Gabi. It's on the outskirts of Rome, and it dates from around the 10th century BC to the 2nd or 3rd centuries AD. And it's kind of known as Rome's first suburb because it was one of the first towns that was just kind of absorbed into the Roman Empire. And here's a map. So on the left, that's an ArcGIS map of Gabi. On site, we take topography points that allow us to create this map in ArcGIS, which I worked with a little bit. And then also on the right is just for reference where Gabi is with respect to Rome. And the objectives of the Gabi project, specifically what I worked with, was to make archaeological information more accessible and to digitalize the information in a 3D format. And we used a lot of video game software, so Unity 3D, and then also just 3D model editing software to do this work. And then the overall benefit of doing this is to reduce potential bias in the archaeological record because there's a record of the artifacts in their original context. And so if you, a lot of times since archaeology is a destructive science, once you excavate a site, it's you can't really see where the artifacts originally were anymore, and they're taken out of context. But in this way, you can preserve some kind of record of where they were. And here's just some terminology. So a stratigraphic layer is a layer of excavation that's marked by a specific feature, for example, the filling of a tomb. Retopography is the process that I had to go through to shrink the file size of these 3D models, because when they're originally taken, they're huge. And basically to do that, I just have to cover them with a lot of like shapes, and then make those shapes like fit to the model, and then bake the texture onto the model after I've like reduced the file size. And that took a long time to learn how to do, but I eventually got it. And then the Unity environment is a virtual environment that's used by gaming software or the gaming industry to create these virtual worlds, which eventually we're hoping that Gabi will be like an interactive site which you'll be able to walk through and see all of the artifacts and the features. And here's just a picture of a Harris matrix. This is like what archaeologists use to identify stratigraphic units. And as you can see, it can be a lot more complex than just like one layer on top of another, because there could be like layers within each other. And one of the things I learned while I was on the site was how to actually identify these layers. I just kind of took it for granted when I was working with the database, because I could see all of the layers in the context, and I didn't even really realize like how complicated it was to identify these. So that's one of the things that I learned when working on site. And then for the photo model production, I worked with the topography team in Gabi, and basically to produce the photo models, there were two different components. One of them was using a total station in ArcGIS to record the locations of where all of these models were like on the site. And then the other part was the actual photo model production. So for that, basically, we take pictures from different angles of the feature, and then points in each of these pictures are correlated with points in other pictures to produce a 3D model. And here's a picture, as you can see on the right side. That's kind of what the photo model production looks like. And then on the left is just me like recording some of the points in their geographical locations. And then after the photo models are taken and produced, the file size was huge, as I mentioned before. So to make it more practical for users to actually work with, I had to do retopology to shrink the file size, and that required using a long list of softwares that I had to learn how to use. And I'm still getting them, but I think it's going a lot better than it was a year ago. And on site, I got to work with Tyler Johnson, who he was the main person who was in charge of this retopology process. And previously, I had to work with him by basically contacting him because he worked at the University of Arkansas. So he'd explain things to me over Skype, and I'd have to like try to figure it out based on his explanation. And so it was really helpful to see him in person, and I think I got a hold of the softwares a lot better after I got to like actually ask him questions. So that was helpful. And now he is here, so that's nice too. So I'm still working with him. And then after the retopology process, the models are exported into Unity where the final product is being created. And then also, the Gabi project maintains an ARC database. It's called the ARC, and that's basically where all of the information is stored, which is really helpful because instead of it just being like a hard copy, you can look up any tomb, any feature that you might want to know more information about. And one of the things that they're trying to integrate into the digital representation is like links to this database. So if you want to know more about a feature that you're looking at, you can just click on it and then you can see the information that's in the database. And here's just a couple of pictures of the process of just making these models. So that's what retopology is. It's just like all these polygons are just on the model to make it a little bit lower resolution. And then that's what one of the photo models looks like in MeshLab, which is a 3D model viewing software. So the next steps, the Gabi project is currently working to get all the models done for one of the areas, Area B, which is primarily composed of tombs, and then we'll move on to other areas of the site. And the workflow that has been developed has been like edited, I guess, over many field seasons. And now I feel like it's really polished in a way that it can be taught to other sites. So some of the other people that I worked with are working with individuals from other sites to teach them about this workflow and the 3D model production. And then that concludes what I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Aliya, for that presentation. Now we're going to turn it over to our panelists to allow our audience to ask questions. I first want to remind everybody that our contact information is here on the screen. Individual fellowships and student fellowships application deadline is upcoming on February 15th, 2017. For information, you can contact us here. The II Fellowships team would be happy to answer any questions. But for right now, I'll turn it over to our audience for any questions.
Thank you. In preparing your application materials, including the proposal development, the letter of recommendation, the in-country resources or statement of support from whoever you're going to be working with in country, the budget, et cetera. I'm just wondering if you could each talk about what was the most challenging for you in that preparation as you applied for funding.
I think for me, the most difficult part was preparing the research plan and understanding what would be useful for me to research and the potential impact of that research, and really detailing a good way to go about studying newborn health. and you know, preparing the budget, as I mentioned, was another unanticipated area that I needed to really work on.
I think for me it was probably making clear why what I was doing was separate from the rest of the project, particularly for some of these kind of collaborative projects, staking out exactly what is yours and why that is different than what other people are doing in 2 pages, in addition to everything else, can be kind of tricky. So I think that's the part I had to spend the most time thinking about how to present, that I am doing my own research, but there's also 100 other people working on similar things, but they're all different.
One thing that comes to mind for me, and I would echo Julie in this, is that it was tricky to develop the budget in a really accurate way. I actually spoke with my sort of advisor at Graduate Career Services at the Ford School, and we walked through the budget together, and she said, you know, you are underestimating everything. It was really, really hard, I think, to get an accurate sense of what, you know, what expenditures were going to look like. But I also was afraid of looking like I was asking for too much. And so figuring out that balance was tricky. And I think in many ways that required, as Andrew mentioned, doing a good amount of research ahead of time on, you know, how much does the average meal cost, and what's really for a place where you'd like to stay, what's really a realistic housing expenditure, and so on.
It's nice to hear all of this information for the future if I apply about the budget. For me, the budget was pretty simple because the program was like an all-inclusive sort of thing. But I think the biggest thing in my application was just writing about how this project would affect my academic development personally, because one of the things is I always was just like working on it and I knew what I was doing, but then like when I would talk about, oh, how is this impacting, you know, what I'm doing for the future, I didn't really step back and think about it until I actually wrote the application. And I feel like that was a good thing for me, at least, because it made me reconsider what I was doing in college.
Sorry, I need to sneak out, actually. That's okay.
I actually have a question. I'm just curious, so for the 2 who were part of group projects, it seems like you had a little bit of a guided kind of what you were doing day to day, kind of duties and expectations when you were in country. But this is also for Julie as well, but I'm just curious. So Tarlise talked a little bit about kind of the flexibility of kind of getting in country and changing and morphing the project. Do you have any advice or any one instance that stood out of where you had to adapt really quickly in country, or how did that impact the research or the project you were working on?
One thing that I hadn't anticipated was, and I should have thought about more, was the importance of language. And I tried to like study a little bit of Italian before I went, but I thought like, oh, you know, I know Spanish, that should like get me by, but I was wrong. And I feel like the first couple weeks just being in Italy, I was like afraid to leave the house like by myself because I didn't know the language, and it was just like a really new experience just being thrown into that culture. But I feel like I adapted over time and just learned basic phrases, and also just learned a little bit more about how to, you know, go grocery shopping and just basic things like that, which is those things I didn't really anticipate before, but definitely if I travel in the future, I'll think about now.
I guess there's 2 kind of half points I'd like to say in answer to that. One of them was I was not expecting, basically our project has slowly been kind of winding down over the past few years, and now, so there was a lot less work to do this summer than I was anticipating, which meant that I had free time for the first time ever. And thinking about actually having time to do research during the field season was very different, and I kind of didn't have a lot of the materials that I wish I had ahead of time, so I probably should have planned more for that. Not this summer, but the previous summer, Greece had a banking crisis, which meant that there was no money in any of the ATMs, and you had to spend 2 hours hunting for cash, which was more of the type of thing that, again, probably should have been prepared for ahead of time, and none of us really thought was seriously going to happen. And I think that that is one thing that I am now much more aware of, that I kind of keep up with Greece and the international news on a weekly basis throughout the entire year, so that during the summer when things happen, I'm not quite as surprised, which is kind of a different type of background research than perhaps the application requires.
I think that's important to keep in mind, to have an ongoing understanding of the contextual background of what's happening in the country. I have a good deal of experience working in international humanitarian medical assistance. So I understand that people have different ways of measuring time, but something last summer that I had to remind myself often to be flexible and patient was working on Zambian time, which led to unanticipated delays in my research project.
Do we have any final questions? If not, do our panelists have any final thoughts they would like to share with us, or?
I'd like to thank the International Institute for their support of my project. It's really appreciated, and I think I'll reap the benefits for years to come.
And I'd like to say that everybody should apply. It's not a scary application. For some reason, everybody talks about it as if it is. It's not. Apply, go do things, learn.
I guess for me, I encourage undergraduates to apply, because when I applied, I was like, I don't know if I have enough experience for this, but I just basically tried my best. And also just working with the International Institute has been a very positive experience with me. I've gotten lots of opportunities to work on my presentation skills, which are important, and it has really inspired me to pursue research in the future.
Great. Well, if there are no final questions, I do want to take a moment to thank our panelists today for sharing with us their research. Sounds all amazing, and we look forward to kind of seeing where it takes you in the future, and also for taking your time to come give a few tips and some advice to those who might be considering applying. And I think, Aliya, I'm going to echo that is correct. We would love to see more undergraduates apply, and Andrew, yes, it's not a scary application. It may take a little bit of time, but the fellowships advisors here at the International Institute and even the centers are here to answer your questions related to applying. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming out today, and we look forward to seeing some great applications in the future. Thank you.